Because there seems to be a lack of new Doctor Who content, I thought I'd do my duty and record a segment about my experiences directing on the TARDIS. So I asked social media fandom for questions about filming on the TARDIS, and because I filmed on 4 different TARDIses, TARDI, mostly, of course, on the Peter Capaldi season 8 through 10 TARDIS, which was a variation of the Matt Smith TARDIS, second TARDIS, but I'm also the first person to shoot on the new David Tennant Ncuti Gatwa TARDIS, so I was involved a little bit in the designs and lighting of it, and I also shot on 2 incarnations of the original classic TARDIS. I think the most general question was simply about how much was the TARDIS designed for specific actions. Were there actors' headcanons about what they did, and were there demands to shoot in specific ways? So to start out, just as each actor had their own way of handling their sonic, they had their own specifics about their TARDIS. It's their space, it's a reverential place, but it's also flexible. When I worked with Peter Capaldi, he had a variety of specifics about how things worked, but also there were specific things that we needed to do, so there was variation on that. For the 60th anniversary TARDIS, I got to see David Tennant work things out for himself. RTD told the art department there should be tons of moving parts in the center console. Lots of buttons, gizmos, levers, and there was no such thing as too many, and it was up to David to make them his own. I'm going to talk a little bit about being involved in the new TARDIS. Mostly it had been designed by RTD in the art department by the time I arrived, and the designs had been put into Unreal Engine, which is a previs program. So right after I arrived, we put on VR goggles and did a 3-dimensional walkthrough. And that was a really cool parlor game, but in reality, the audience was going to be viewing the TARDIS in 2D, so I wanted to see it that way. I wanted to be able to talk through the practical designs and the shot planning. We had to figure out where we could put the camera. The art department had to make sure that all the physical designs worked. So we went right into old school prepping, and even including a physical model of it. The set was really big, and production had decided that, like in RTD's original era, there was not going to be a 360-degree set, theorizing that it was easier to get the camera in and out and get wider shots if there was this open area to put a crane. The design had lots of additional walkways, so it had a cool M.C. Escher feel, but half of those were virtual. So they said they would be added in post, and there would be green screen for the 25% of the set that wasn't built. I never saw any of that used in the episodes, but the promise is still there. Even with 3/4 of a set, there were 800 roundels. So what was most challenging was how would you light them? And DOP Matt Gray, who shot the Star Beast, was tasked with working this out. And we did a whole bunch of tests, and Matt worked with the lighting team and the manufacturers to guarantee that each roundel had its own LED strips, which could be individually programmed and run on an iPad. And there were so many elements of what he was working out. It seems like you have a light and you have a Fresnel lens or a type of lens, and then you just put the LED strips on and you program them. It was much more complicated than that. The set wasn't finished until well after I completed principal photography on the Star Beast, so I was heavily into editing when I returned from my 1 day of shooting. And because I was revealing the new set, I was very conscious of wanting to show it off as much as possible for the scope and the flexibility of the set. So my first idea was to have David run through the entire set. He was fully game, and you can see that in the take that I show in another video on this channel. After that, he made his choices of which of the mechanics to play with. Yes, the coffee maker was specific, but we were able to make up on the day when David would say, oh, it can do this and that, we were able to make up what he was going to do and what it would do. And because each roundel was programmable, I wanted to show off the variety of lighting patterns, which were kind of infinite. And I could have spent a day just doing that, but the scene's the scene, and we had to get on with the story, so much for the fun that I was having. At the end of my scene, the TARDIS blows up, so we also got to showcase the emergency lighting. The blowing up of the TARDIS was kind of a big to-do because we couldn't actually set fire to the set. I mean, it was new, and the next day, so they couldn't even wait another day to repair things. The next day, episode 2 was shooting their material, and the set had to be pristine. I didn't want to make all the effects CG because I thought that would look lame, and also because it didn't give the actors as much to react to, and the producers didn't want me to blow up the set, duh. So ultimately, Danny Hargreaves and his special effects team created a bunch of effects that were safe for the set. It was risky, but it was a good base. So we did do some CG enhancements, but a lot of it came from exactly what Danny did. So on to the questions. Is blocking on the TARDIS set always the same around the console, or what allows the director to change up the shots or where people stand? So within the parameters of the script, it's definitely up to the actors and director to work out where they stand and what they do. With Peter Capaldi, he loves movement, and he was happy using a lot of the set. So I might give him some general direction if we needed to end up in a specific place, but mostly I let Peter work out what worked best for him in the scenes, and then I filmed what he found. There were cases where I wanted specific shots, and I was able to give Peter these as guidance, but I would always have a reason. Sometimes I would suggest that we use the upper or lower levels, and sometimes he would come up with these ideas how to do it. It was pretty symbiotic. Question: on the TARDIS set, what were practical effects and what gets enhanced by post-production CGI? For example, are the screens actually used for the TARDIS scanner when you're filming on set, or is it that only done in post-production and the actors have to act to blank screen? So there are some standard screens which were done with computer playback, and if specific or different screens were needed for a specific episode, they were prepared for playback, but it always depended what order we were shooting in, if there was enough time to prepare the material. So yes, there were often times where the actors were acting to blank screens. For instance, in Heaven Sent, Peter was watching himself die, but the watching scene was shot right at the beginning of the schedule, and he hadn't shot the other material yet, so that was definitely added later. When I was shooting the new TARDIS, RTD had designed an area on the wall that would be a video screen that was supposed to be completely CG. That was not used in the 60th anniversary specials, but it was intended to be VFX. Are there any strange rules that are in effect on the TARDIS console set? For example, no eating or no paint markers are allowed on set. So pretty standard stuff. There's always no eating or drinking on set rule. The crew is particularly respectful of the TARDIS sets. One of the issues with the Capaldi TARDIS was that the floor, actually one of the issues with all the TARDISes is that the floor was always getting dirty with the crew climbing all over it. So everyone was supposed to wear clean booties, but that didn't always happen. So when we filmed Series 10, art director Nick suggested we return to the days where the floor was polished so it shone. Then the booties were even more important, but it looks a lot better. Also in the Capaldi TARDIS, when it's flying, steam came up through the floor, and you don't see it very often, but it is there. And it was created by real steamers on the set. So the set would become all hot and muggy and kind of gross. Is the TARDIS console always set up, or do they break it down at the end of the season and then put it back up? And if this was Classic Who, I would ask, how do they know which panels go which way, and is the Cardiff always set up the same way? Clever, I don't have an answer to the Classic Who questions. But in the meantime, yes, the TARDIS set is the one set that stays standing, and they do tours and things of it, so it stays standing even on the downtime. What did change with each episode was there's always a question of what do you see outside the door. And so sometimes part of a set would be built outside, sometimes blue or green screen was put up, sometimes it was just dark, sometimes the doctor doesn't open the door enough to see what's on the other side, which is the cheapest thing, and always the thing that they hope you're going to ask for. But this was always a key question because it involved construction and money and VFX shots and money and money and money. The Capaldi set wasn't crane friendly, and 360s were difficult. Certain movements required either removing parts of the roof or building a platform. That seems fine, except you need time to remove those special items. So there's never enough time, so you have to choose those moments carefully and pre-plan them and hope that the carpenters can do it overnight, but then they still have to put the set back together. So whenever you make choices for those kinds of shots, you're limiting other things that you're doing within the day. In terms of the new TARDIS, obviously, since it wasn't 360, there was a natural position for the crane at all times. It was perfectly positioned for having a telescoping crane, but that's why you always see it from one primary direction on most of the wide shots so far. If you had the limitless ability to build a TARDIS set and to do something completely creative with how you shot it, what would that be, and what would your dream equipment be to realize that shot? If I had limitless ability to do whatever I wanted, I'd build a real TARDIS now, wouldn't I? Yeah, I'd do that. The more serious answer is the sky's the limit, and it's not really about the equipment, it's about just getting the coolest shots for what's appropriate for the scenes, but I always thought that a small drone would be fun in the new TARDIS set, and I wanted roof panels that were removable so that you could get really high over the center console, but there was no time to shoot anything like that when I was there. Is there anything on the TARDIS that actually makes noise, squeaks or rattles that has to be covered up by the dialogue in filming? When the actors punch buttons in the TARDIS console, does it fully work? Need to be done later to enhance the audio of what's being filmed. The levers are made to be quiet and to not ruin dialogue. Where there was a real problem was on the old TARDIS in Hell-Bent, and that set was a mess and not really even finished when we went to film it. And that's partially because it had to be moved because of Maisie Williams's really difficult schedule because of floods and disasters on Game of Thrones. But that's another story. The set was unfinished, the doors and the walls were too short, and the design was very difficult. But the center console came from the wonderful Adventures in Space and Time, and when the column went up and down, it landed with a huge ka-chunk. And it sort of wheezed, but it didn't wheeze like a good TARDIS-y wheeze, it just wheezed like a sound that killed the sound recordist. So and all they would do was come to me and say, can you shoot around it? Don't see the center console, don't see the colander thing. And all I wanted to do was see it, because you can fix the sound, but you can't get the cool pictures if you shoot around it. So I wasn't being bullied into that. I wasn't being pushed into that. The very first episode of Doctor Who, when they filmed the pilot episode, which went to broadcast over 30 years ago, the TARDIS doors accidentally stuck open while filming, and they had to give the grips to fix the doors in real time. Is there anything in the TARDIS that we don't really usually see that sometimes needs to be fixed or repaired, sometimes in real time? And those are great stories, but nah, you don't really need to do real-time fixes because you could just stop and fix and do another take. The most real-time work I do on set is if I'm doing a transition where a piece of set needs to be removed to reveal a new location. I can't think of any time I did that on my Doctor Who episodes, although I may have. But I did it a lot on my Sherlock episode in transitions that didn't make it into the final edit. And I did it very much on Nightmare on Elm Street. And if you watch the sequence in this channel of Tracy's Nightmare, I explain exactly about doing that, which leads into the time rotor question. And when the time rotor is activated, it moves up and down. Is all this mechanically built and actuated now? Or like in the early days, did it have to be done by a gripper person actually helping make that happen? And now it's all mechanical, so there's no need for a grip. The place that you have the grips doing the most work is when you have pocket doors. They never work properly. But in the center console, the new TARDIS has these cool LED lights that move up and down and give a greater impression of movement. Of all the TARDIS sets that the show has seen all over the years, do you have a particular favorite or one that you personally like? And I have a rule not to do favorites, or maybe the rule made me, because the second you ask me for a favorite, my brain glitches and all the alternatives flow through the synapses and I'm paralyzed for an answer. So in addition, I don't like rating things because invariably somebody gets hurt. And I don't mind being top ranked, of course. I mean, I'm not ego dead. Was there a personal favorite detail you had about the set? And I can just say I found new delights every time I was on one. But I obviously had a great time on the Capaldi TARDIS. I do regret not having more time and opportunity to do things on the new TARDIS that could have shown off its opportunities. Were there any shots you were particularly proud of? Perhaps a shot or angle that you'd never done before? I'm happy with how we made the TARDIS very much a part of the Doctor's mood and situation in Heaven Sent and in Hell-Bent. I love the look through the central console when there are multiple images, and how turning it changes the look in the whole set, and it sort of creates the feeling of the Doctor's mind. I was really happy with that. And I also like the wide shot when he walks into the empty TARDIS, dusty TARDIS, and the lights start to turn on in Hell-Bent. You can't do that central console glass rotor look in the new TARDIS because the glass rotor is actually too high up. So behind the actors' heads is the solid piece that supports it, and it's just definitely, it gives you less opportunity to see it when you are doing close-ups of the actors. What piece of each of the consoles broke the most often? I didn't have a lot of trouble with things breaking on the 12th Doctor's TARDIS. By the time I was there, it was glued together pretty well. But when I worked on the new TARDIS, it was its first day, so there were tons of problems. The worst was that the walkways wobbled so much. It felt unsafe, and we didn't even try to run cameras on them. But it was too early for that to fall apart either. But I know they did a lot of additional construction work on it after we shot those first 3 days, meaning me and the other two 60th anniversary directors. Was there something Easter eggish and TARDIS related that you really wanted to sneak into an episode that you weren't able to? Well, the coolest thing we did was that on World Enough in Time, Mark Gatiss brought in John Pertwee's jacket and we put it in the background. It was just amazing to have that archive. Thinking mainly of the 12th Doctor set, was that a full 360 construction? How many of the wall sections could be removed to allow for greater camera movement and shooting from different angles and perspectives? And I've talked a bunch about this, but I think there were 2 sections of the roof that were removable because I used them both, but the second section might have been something that was rigged specifically for me. The main section had been used a bunch of times before. Would you like to have shot an episode of the 15th Doctor's TARDIS? If so, what would you have done, used that space? It's really big with lots of accessible different levels, which could lead to some really cool shots. I don't think the new TARDIS has been showcased nearly enough, and there are many opportunities to do more with it. Ncuti did a lot of movement in it, but I think there's more opportunities to take you from place to place. But most of the scenes were set around the central console, and one of the issues there is that your background is the 800 roundels in many cases. So if you're in a close-up, which is a natural place to be, often the backgrounds seem repetitive. If more than one character has roundel background, it doesn't give you enough geography to get the most out of the space. So that's just an opinion. Note it's an opinion. But I think that the space is best used in wide shots. It looks the best in wide shots. Thus concludes part 1 of the questions on the TARDIS. Please put comments and additional questions in the chat below, and give me other ideas of things you want and what's working, and like and subscribe because that makes me feel better.